Peter Zeihan's daily or weekly newsletter or video.
Yeah.
I sent you something recently. You should know that he's changing his weekly subscription service to a subscription paid service.
Monetizing it.
He's monetizing it, but he's still keeping the free version available to the public.
Eventually.
But there, for the time being, you mean? But there
No,
will be a slight delay in terms of releasing schedule.
I don't think he said slight. I think he said there will be a delay.
Hmm.
But it takes a while to publish a book, so if you get most of his information from his books, you're already seeing a delay.
So just remember, I got it on the record here. If you see the price of gasoline at the pump go up precipitously in the next coming weeks, you heard it here first, folks.
And that would tend to incline undecided voters, depending on who they think would manage the economy better in November.
Jason, this is Bob. Can anybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, Jason, if in fact the amount of oil that's being exported out of the Middle East is being greatly reduced, and the price of oil in the United States is not going up precipitously, what would be your explanation outside of the fact that the United States is primarily self-sufficient with regards to oil?
Well, if Israel hits the Iranian oil reserves, as they might very well do, and the price of oil continues to stay stable in the United States, I would say that one of two possibilities are likely. One, that we're drawing from our strategic national reserve, or two,
Yeah.
David's correct, and that we are more self-sufficient than what I had previously than what has been previously indicated to me.
What you believe by previously published research. By the way, almost all research I've ever read was previously published, but that's a different that was a different question altogether. Okay, well, now we have you on the record. Thank you.
Yep.
There is a couple of very interesting things. There is a long debate between John Mearsheimer and a fellow named Jeffrey Sachs on YouTube, which is part of something called All In, but the All In matters less discussion between the two professors, and it describes important differences between their belief about what works or will not work in today's highly technical and nuclear world. There's another interesting video that I just listened to, sent to me by some guy named Eric Hand. Has anyone ever heard of this fellow? Anyway, it has to do with this new stuff called artificial intelligence, which seems to be progressing, and how dangerous it is becoming and can become. And when you posit that with what's happening at OpenAI with regards to having only one person left from its founders, pretty much, and it being a very closed type of environment, it makes you pause with regards to all the different stuff that we're worrying about, while artificial intelligence seems to be sneaking up on us and taking control. So doesn't mean they will, doesn't mean they are, but it sure is scary. So it's worth thinking about.
Bob, are you talking about the All In podcast with David Sachs and the four guys that do that professional?
Yes, they have an annual conference, and they publish the interviews from that conference. And one of the interviews is a discussion between Mearsheimer and Sachs, and these four people pretty much take their noses out of the discussion and just leave the two professors alone to describe their views on how the world works from a foreign relations point of view. And although there's many agreements, and certainly Sachs has in high regard Mearsheimer, there's great disagreements, and it makes you have to stop and think through which way your mind thinks is the most likely way that the world works. And that's always, in my mind, worth spending an hour with. And so I certainly recommend it.
I think what put me off, I was watching that program pretty consistently, but I was put off by the fact that they were being a little bit, I know David Sachs is a little bit towards the Republican side. I mean, there's
You think a little bit?
There's Jason Kalinasis and then Chamath, who seem to be a little bit left leaning, and then there's David Sachs and David, what is his last name? The scientific guy, who are a little bit more right leaning.
Friedberg. But it doesn't, in this case, it doesn't matter. I agree with you that it can be off-putting, but I suggest that you consider putting your off-puttingness away and just trying to listen to what they have to say about things. Some of the stuff is extremely political and will offend the way that you may think, and in fact the way that I may think. But the other stuff is quite valuable. And in case of this, and I'm willing to put up with biases, because I'm becoming reasonably good at understanding what is biased and what isn't. At least I'm getting better. And I'm always up for learning things, even though I have to shift through those biases. But I agree with you that they are all for Republicans. They all support Trump. I really don't understand how intelligence people can be doing that. I think I do understand why they're doing it, but I think they don't have the same view of Trump as I do. But that being said, in fact, one of the most intelligent people I know is supporting Trump all the way. But
well, I think I saw Mark Cuban do an interview regarding why would someone like Elon Musk side for Trump, and he said, well, you have to consider that he's interested in being in control of the most powerful man in the world. So that would be one reason why he would possibly do that.
Here's an interesting thing that Sachs said, okay? Mark Cuban brought up the point that Trump never sends emails. They all agree he never sends emails, okay? And Cuban said that he believes it's because he doesn't want to leave a paper trail, which, by the way, if you understand Roy Cohn, who was Trump's mentor, you understand that that's most likely why he does not send emails. I mean, you can't know, but most likely. While Sachs believes that it's because he's just a generation beyond being able to use email, which I find hard to believe since I'm 2 years younger than he is, and I'm quite comfortable sending an email. And Brian Torn was much older than that, was quite comfortable using the email. So I wonder which one is more likely, that he just doesn't like to leave a paper trail for anything. In Judaism, we call this a shyster or a gana, or that he just is too old and he just hasn't been able to get used to using email. I'll leave that for your particular thoughts about it, but I think it's because he doesn't want anyone to be able to come back and say, "Hey, you said this."
But
Okay.
one of the big things that he did with Hillary Clinton is charge her with using her emails in an unofficial capacity. And so maybe he's just more aware of the side effects or the downside of being of a paper trail. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's something to be
I think he's aware of that.
The
It's
old
also
method of writing
much easier to fake emails for someone who is knowing sending lots of emails. But if you are known for not sending emails, fake emails become a non-problem because everyone knows this is a fake.
So
There's something
if you've ever experienced a con man, okay,
Yeah.
then you know that one of the main things that a con man does is he makes you believe in promises that he's made, or implied promises that he's made or she's made, but never puts it in writing, never puts it into an email, never puts it in a letter. Is this evidence that he's a con man? It is, I guess, some evidence. It's weak evidence that he's a con man. I think probably Trump University may be a better evidence that he is in fact a con man. But I'm just saying that it is interesting how biased a person believes. He didn't. What Sachs said was he's just too old to have learned how to use an email, and the chances of that being true are extremely small, and the chances of someone with the IQ of Sachs, which is extraordinarily high, actually believing that is, I think, minuscule. So it's what you have to learn to and try to pick through as you're going through all the mishigas that is facing us as we have 5 more weeks or 4 more weeks until we can finally pull a lever on this. So.
There's something to be said about the old-fashioned style of writing a letter in person by hand. It's more meaningful and sentimental when you get a letter that somebody has taken the time to write out by hand. It's kind of an old-fashioned, we often bemoan the loss of like the impersonal touch where people used to actually write with stationery and with calligraphy. And it was more meaningful if you got a letter in the mail than an email.
Is it your position? Is it your position that he writes small letters, short letters on a time-to-time basis because he's an extremely empathetic and caring individual? Is that?
I think it's more he just doesn't like to read.
I have a more interesting question. Okay. What is more plausible? A room full of highly intelligent, highly respectable individuals all coming to the consensus that Trump is the superior choice due to ignorance or due to faulty logic and reasoning, and that somehow you have some key insight that they all lack? Or
I think if there were only those 4 individuals and there was just me, and I didn't know me and I didn't know them, I would choose those 4 individuals. But I don't think that is the actual book or chapter or white paper to be written. I would think that I would be a small part of that. The only person I have to support me. But I agree with you. Those people are all much more accomplished, probably more knowledgeable, at least in terms of their areas of interest than I am. It doesn't make me a complete putz, though. And
no, I'm not saying it does, but I'm saying it might pay to gain new insight, to try to understand what they see that you don't, to see what insight that they have that I lack, to find out what
No,
is it that I'm missing.
I think I've done that, but thank you for the suggestion.
This is a piece of V-mail that my mom sent to my dad when he was overseas during the Second World War. And it's photographic. It's a photographic copy of a handwritten letter.
Mhm.
I don't know if you can see, but it says V-mail down there.
Mhm. Mhm.
I have reluctantly come to the conclusion, having a diehard liberal Democrat in the House, that Trump is certainly trying to be a Nazi. And listening to a bunch of friends in the military, that Thelma is definitely a communist. So I can choose between voting for the Nazis or voting for the communists. And my reaction to this election is that I'm going to write in Barry Goldwater.
I, by the way,
That's
agree
where
with
we went wrong.
I agree with you that both these candidates have extraordinary shortcomings. But when it comes to the shortcomings of Trump, because I see him as being someone with the potential to do damage that's difficult to overcome, and I see what Kamala could do to be less difficult to overcome. I choose Kamala, but really I prefer neither. Okay, but unfortunately there are people I like. I like Vivek Ramaswamy. I think he's extremely intelligent and well spoken and has deep knowledge. But Trump does not.
No.
So
Neither of them. If this was a comedy review, both of them would be ideal candidates.
So
but it's not.
Well, we're not supposed to be talking about politics. I don't know who brought that up. Was it Kaufman? Oh, that guy Kaufman. I can't stand it.
Thank you, Bob. I've had my hand up for a while, and I'd like to get in quick before 10 o'clock when we are expecting to turn it over to Tom Walsh.
Speak, David.
Just as a quick aside, I'd like to show share screen for just a minute. Jason, can you see the U.S. Energy Facts Explained from the U.S. Energy Information Administration?
It's in small print, but I can see this that you're sharing.
Yeah, the United States has been an annual net total energy exporter since 2019. Okay? And now how do I go back out of sharing screen?
I'm wondering how you account for the fact that the United States oil markets continue to be at the mercy of Middle East politics then. How do you explain that?
I would have to say that there's some question about the logical consistency there.
Yeah, the markets aren't strictly based off of supply and demand. I mean, it's more about sentiment and what prices they want to set on products. So, and even if it's true that we're, self-sufficient in regards to oil, but if the Israeli hit the pipelines in Iran retaliates and hits the pipelines in Saudi Arabia, that's going to affect the oil in China and other places. And that's going to come back to, affect the prices on goods that the United States purchases. So either way, I mean, it's like we're living in a global economy. Things aren't localized as much anymore.
Yeah, if extra demand comes from China, it still raises prices.
I guess time will tell as to whether or not my predictions will pan out.
Well, it's not always the resource of oil, it's the actual refining process that can make a difference as well.
I personally
What
hope
is the
I'm
logic
want to pay more.
behind what is the logic behind being an exporter of oil and an importer of oil?
Different kinds of oil.
Yeah,
Mm,
oil. There's different qualities of oil, and some refineries just don't refine certain kinds of oil.
I see.
It's now 10 o'clock. Tom, you're presenting?
Yes,
Do you want to ask some of our new people whether they would like to introduce themselves to the group?
sure. Um, some of the new people, Yanif, Wayne, who else? Jack, maybe. You could have quick introductions. Just let us know who you are.
I am, I guess, a former professor of economics. Now I do risk calculations for a hedge fund. I've long been interested in the topic, so that's what brought me in. Haven't done any research in the field, but just curious.
You may know more about it than I do then. But
Probably not.
I hope this will be
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Wayne.
Yes, Wayne. I've been here a few times before, but it's been a few months. I'm a retired Medicare actuary, very interested in the topic. I've read about it here and there. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what you folks have for insights and such. And it prodded me to finish one book I was reading about Peter Turchin. I went, oh, this is good. But you had to write down all the equations. Done. It's going, oh, yeah, this is clear once you write it down. He writes very well, but you can't speed read equations, I found dreadfully.
No.
And I've forgotten most of my partial differential equations, but yeah, we're not really going to get into that.
Oh, maybe ordinary differential equations then, at least.
Jack.
Yeah, so currently I'm in San Diego, but I've the last couple of years kind of been traveling the world as a digital nomad software engineer, but recently been moving over more into machine learning and AI. In terms of Clio, I read Foundation from Isaac Asimov, and then recently The Year of the Jackpot by Heinlein, based off of the mentions on the Wikipedia regarding this topic. And so that's kind of, I heard about it first in a meetup like maybe a year ago or something like that. So I'm kind of curious to learn more. Thanks.
Okay.
Welcome.
Yeah, there probably will be a brief mention to the Foundation series in this, but I'm not going to delve into that really. Just a couple of us. David, who is your host, your meetup host
Micah?
today? Well, you started the Zoom session. He's our treasurer. I'm current president of Minnesota Futurists. And H. Tom, who is our secretary, isn't here right now. So
No, he's here.
Hello.
Oh yeah, there you are. That's
You
all
missed
right.
you missed FICA, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
FICA or
That's right. Hello. I'm an old timer. I just hide behind my camera. Good to see everyone.
Becca was here last week.
Yes.
Yes.
And just to give credit where it's due, Stan is the host for this particular meeting, I think,
Oh, okay.
and is handling the recording.
So Tom, are you going to be showing any YouTubes today?
Yes. I'll start out just going through some slides that I've created, but it's mostly just words. but there will be a number of videos later on. It was hard to select videos for this actually, because most of the videos that are out there regarding this are an hour or more long. So we can't show an hour-long video on this, but I'll try to do some interesting things. And I think Bob Kaufman, could you please mute yourself? Thanks. Okay, so I'll get started. Let's see if I can bring up what if I can find my presentation here. The topic for the day is Cliodynamics. So I'm going to do the W's. What is it? Who developed it, and when and where it got started? How does it work, and why do we need it? So what we're going to do is we'll pause occasionally for Q&A. So this won't be just a straight talk, but we'll have discussion along the way. But when you want to when you have a point to make or a question to ask, use the what is it? Raise your hand down at the bottom of the screen for your response, and then David, maybe could you call on people, because I won't be able to see that very well while I'm doing the presentation, while I'm sharing my screen.
Oh, I will try.
Okay. Well, we'll see how that works. Okay. So Cliodynamics, what is it? It was named after Clio, the muse of history. And basically it's an attempt to do history as hard science rather than as a social science. So its goal is to develop mathematical theories or mathematical hypotheses that can be tested and developed into theories that can explain and predict historical patterns. And mostly what this concentrates on are patterns of large scale societal structures. And you can think of it as a combination of a variety of different disciplines, including cultural evolution, economic history, macro sociology, mathematical modeling, complex systems analysis, and historical database construction and analysis of the data. So complex systems, history, human society is a complex system. So that's going to be an important thing that's used by Cliodynamics. So what are these things? Well, cultural evolution is a study of how human cultures change over time. And it draws parallels to biological evolution by examining the transmission and variation of cultural traits, like beliefs, behaviors, and technologies, through social learning mechanisms, such as imitation and teaching across generations within a population. Cultural evolution itself is an interdisciplinary field, and that contains aspects of anthropology, psychology, economics, sociology. It tries to understand how cultural traits are selected and evolve within different environments. So Cliodynamics could be thought of as an extension of this. Economic history is a branch of historiography that is concerned with the history and development of economic systems. So more broadly, it's the historical study of economic aspects of human existence. So it encompasses themes such as production, distribution, trade, inequality, living standards, and social transformation within the context of innovation, growth, and development. It uses methodological tools from economics, and its research is conducted using a combination of historical methods, statistical methods, and the application of economic theory to historical situations and institutions. Many universities offer this as a major. Some of these, many of these parts of Cliodynamics can be studied separately at universities themselves and be endeavors that people do as their main focus in life. Macro sociology is a branch of sociology that focuses on the study of human societies and the organizations and systems that impact those societies. It centers on outside influences such as political systems, educational systems, and religious systems, and how these impact the society. Mathematical modeling is probably pretty self-explanatory. It's the process of formulating an abstract model in terms of mathematical language to describe complex behavior of a real system. Mathematical models are quantitative models, often expressed in terms of ordinary and partial differential equations. Some examples are what we do to model weather patterns and predict what weather might be occurring next. Complex systems analysis studies how the interactions between the system's parts gives rise to its collective behaviors. It's different from reductionism, which attempts to explain systems by breaking them down into their individual parts. Instead, complex systems analysis focuses on the system as a whole and how its parts interact to create new properties and behaviors. So this is not kind of the Aristotelian way of breaking things down into little parts, but rather it's a more holistic approach to analyzing systems. Some complex systems that can be addressed, as I mentioned, are in the mathematical modeling, are weather, protein folding, insect societies, the human body, etc., all very complex systems. Historical database construction and analysis. You can't have good modeling if you don't have good data on which the models are based. So to do this, researchers build and utilize specialized databases to store and analyze the historical data, which then allows them to study these past events that they're putting into the database and discern trends with advanced computational methods. Some of the databases are listed here. CISHAT or CISHAT is a global history data bank that includes social, political, and economic data across numerous societies. over the last 5,000 years or so is the societies we're talking about. And all the way from Egypt, China, to current societies. And most of these, we're not talking tribal level societies, we're talking large level societies such as nation states. This is one of the most comprehensive, largest and comprehensive databases, and the current, I don't know his title, but the person who's been leading the effort to create the data in Seshat is Peter Turchin. Crisis DB is an offshoot of Seshat, and that has to do with societies that fail, and it creates data that's relevant to the failure of societies. Some others are Clioscope, which isn't listed there. That's developed by the French Society of Cliodynamics that digitizes historical data from various sources. dPlace is a database of places, languages, culture, and environment. It provides data on over 1,400 human social formations. I think the Seshat database currently has about 200 various social organizations in it, but it has a lot more data about them. CHIA, the Collaborative for Historical Information and Analysis, archives historical information and links data from academic research institutions from around the world. The International Institute of Social History collects data on global social history of labor relations, workers and labor. That one, I'm not going to talk about any of the analysis or results that's based on that data, as far as I know. And then Clio Infra is mostly concerned with the economic performance of these large societies, as well as the education and inequality and societal well-being within those societies. So this is a kind of a summary of the kind of data that goes into Cliodynamics. Other factors that could be considered, population is a big one, and that's kind of what got Peter Turchin started on the path of Cliodynamics, because that's what he was doing, is studying population and its growth, its changes, its movement, in fact, within various different species, not just human populations. Geography, flood, famines, pandemics, those kinds of things can affect human societies greatly, of course, too. When people look at history, they try to discern cycles, the ups and downs of a society or whatever. Cliodynamics isn't just a cyclical view of history. Its roots are nonlinear dynamical systems, and it tries to determine the mechanisms that result in changes to society, the cause and effect, and these nonlinear dynamical systems could interact in such a ways to create cycles. So the results could look cyclical. When looking at nation state level society oscillations, these oscillations, as in the graph on the right there, can arise because nonlinear feedbacks between different interacting components of the system. Other relationships could also arise, not just cyclical ones like this. This example is particularly striking because it looks like the two sine waves that are 180 degrees out of phase. This type of relationship has been observed in a number of societies over time. As you can see in this particular graph, it's graphing popular well-being is one of the cycles. How well off the populace is within a society versus something I'll get into later and define, elite overproduction. We'll define what elites are and what overproduction of those is, how that occurs. Note that these cycles in the graph here indicate a stable equilibrium. There are changes in the society, but they always come back. So you have ups and downs, but it's stable over time. The question is, how big do the oscillations have to get before the system becomes unstable and can't return to the previous state? When that occurs, that indicates the collapse of the society. And there are a lot of societies that have collapsed over time, so it's relevant, and that's part of what Cliodynamics tries to determine is how and why these societies grow and how they collapse. This quote here down at the bottom is from an article by Peter Turchin, and it said, well, you could read it, but other colleagues, it says, have extended empirical investigations to more regions and historical periods. So currently they have about 30 secular cycles that they've identified from their data, and they're building this crisis DB, which I mentioned, one of the databases, to add to that number. The idea is that they found these large-scale oscillations in pretty much all the societies that are organized as states. And Peter Turchin says it's like a law of history or something, that societies will go through these kinds of oscillations. Before I go on, I just want to ask David, are there any questions, or should I just keep going?
Nobody has their hand up.
Okay, either they're bored out of their minds, or or this is understandable. All right.
Okay, Jack, if you'll unmute yourself.
Yeah, so I've never read any of Peter Turchin's books. I'm wondering if you or anyone else has, and if there's any recommendations in someone that's like new to Cliodynamics.
Well, his most recent book is called End Times, and I do have a list of books coming up on one or two slides from the other. So we can I can mention those, and there's a few that kind of stand out on that list.
Okay,
and I
thank
don't
you.
know if anyone else has any recommendations. So far, he's written, I think, 9 books, and there's a 10th on the way, as mentioned here on this slide. So he's been pretty prolific as far as writing papers and books about this. Okay, Peter Turchin is basically the founder of Cliodynamics. He coined the term in 2003 when he was at the University of Connecticut as a professor. He and some colleagues started work on this about that time. Um, so a little bit about Peter Turchin himself. He grew up in Russia and lived there until his father was exiled from the Soviet Union in 1977 for being a dissident. He received a PhD in zoology from Duke in 1985, Duke University, and researched population dynamics in the 1990s and early 2000s, how populations varied, moved around, and so forth. He researched secular cycles and the collapse of complex societies. And with Andrei Korotayev, he researched the relationship between population and the probability of warfare. And one of his publications that came out of that was the book War and Peace and War, which indicates a cyclical nature regarding population and warfare. In 2010, he published research using 40 different combined social indicators from his databases to predict that there would be worldwide social unrest in the 2020s. He subsequently cited the success of Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign as evidence that negative trends seem to be accelerating and that there has been an unprecedented collapse of social norms governing civil discourse. So that's a symptom of these larger forces at work, is what he's saying. In 2020, 4 years ago, he and Jack Goldstone predicted that political and civic unrest in the United States would continue regardless of the party in power until a leader took action to reduce inequality and improve the social indicators that are tracked in their research. So what we are going through now is kind of an inevitable result of what started perhaps 50 years ago in the late 70s, early 80s. He's produced over 200 scientific papers, 9 books, as I mentioned, with the 10th on the way. And now a lot of people are doing research in cliodynamics. Most of the research seems to be in the US and Britain, but as we saw, one of the databases was developed in France. And there's other countries that are getting more involved in this new science. He's Peter Turchin, founder of the journal Cliodynamics. He's currently professor emeritus at UConn, University of Connecticut, in the departments of ecology and evolutionary biology, anthropology, and mathematics. He's a project leader at the Complexity Science Hub in Vienna and a research associate at the School of Anthropology at the University of Oxford. And as I mentioned before, he's the founding director of the Sichat database. So he's been pretty much the driving force behind cliodynamics since its inception. But it's becoming more widespread and more people are involved in it now. Here's a bibliography of his books that he's written so far. So he started out looking at population distributions in animals and plants back in the 90s. And that evolved into looking at population dynamics in human societies. And then he got into seeing relationships between population and the rise and fall of these societies. Probably one of his first books is one I already mentioned. That's pretty important, and that's War and Peace and War, which went into the rise and the fall of empires over time. Another important, I think one of the books that is pretty important that he produced in 2013, and I guess it was 2016, was The Ages of Discord. And that's a analysis of American history. So it goes into pre-Civil War times, the Civil War and the aftermath, and a couple of the other cycles that we've gone through, such as the period during and after the Great Depression, the 1970s, and what we're going through now. The End Times, the book I've mentioned already, I think, was just published last year. And so a lot of the videos, a lot of the commentary that you find out on the web these days isn't addresses the issues of that book. And that's it concentrates a lot on American society. And it talks about these concepts of the elites and the underpopulation, overpopulation of various classes within society. So let's just go back for a second. Some of these books, Historical Dynamics from 2003, War and Peace and War, Ages of Discord and End Times, were probably, I'd say, the ones to look at first if you're interested in investigating this.
Could I make a comment?
Now go ahead, David.
I was particularly intrigued by Ultra Society, how 10,000 years of war made humans the greatest cooperators on Earth.
Yeah, I haven't gotten into that book, but it does sound interesting. The progress of human societies has been basically based on cooperation, and it's large-scale cooperation, which is something that, I mean, we can see cooperation occurring on small scales in the apes and other species, ants, whatever. But we don't see large-scale cooperation, like involving societies of millions of people in any other species. So the fact that we can cooperate in such a large scale has been a big factor in progress of humanity, if you can call it progress. We have done we've made a lot of advances, especially the last 500 years in science and technology. And we're currently changing the face of the Earth because of that. So yeah, I'd like to get into that book too. I haven't yet.
I guess I've read 4 of his books, and it strikes me that he really doesn't explain his methods very well in his books. They're more a summary of his observations based on the methods.
Right. The books are made for a broad audience. Mm-hmm. He's put written over 200 papers that are more technical, many of them.
Yeah, which I haven't looked at.
Okay. So how does Cliodynamics work? What do they do? What do cliodynamicists do? they developed theories that explain such large-scale dynamical processes as the rise and fall of empires, population booms and busts, and the spread and disappearance of religions. And they do this by the construction and analysis of historical databases. I can't give you a size in terms of bytes or whatever of the size of these databases, but they're growing all the time. Research is occurring and adding to these databases all the time. They discover historical patterns and translate the patterns from this data that they are looking at into mathematical models or computer algorithms. So it's like any other science, like physics, for example, which is my background, that they create mathematical models using various mathematical techniques to model what's going on in nature, or in this case, in human societies. And then these hypotheses, these models that are created, can be tested against data from actual historical societies. So you can input what a historical society at a certain point in time is like and how it got there, and develop these mathematical formulas that can break down relationships among various factors in that society, and use those mathematical models to make projections for a later time in those societies, and see how well those projections correspond with the reality, what actually happened. So that's how you test these theories. I don't want to call them theories. I test these hypotheses. Once they're tested, if they turn out to be not, if they aren't by this kind of testing of the models using historical data, if the projections turn out to be not, let's say, if they turn out to agree with the actual occurrence of the society, then you can call these hypotheses theories about how well about how societies work. I just want to say, as from my physics background, I'm careful about using the word theory. Theory is a model that has not been disproven. So it's as far as we know, it's true. A hypothesis is kind of a guess, and it could be true, but it has to be tested. And that's what they do in Cliodynamics. When Cliodynamicists look at the rise and fall of societies, the four main variables, there are many other variables, and they'll be mentioned a little later, some of them, are population numbers, the social structure, the strength of the state, and how that strength is perceived among the populace, and political instability. Some of the terms and concepts related to the rise and fall of large-scale societies, such as nation states, are inequality, popular immiseration, wealth pump, elite overproduction, and I'll be getting into the meanings of some of these concepts and phrases a little later. So here's an example that Cliodynamics has been applied to. And his most recent book, End Times, explains this. It looks at the 21st century United States, which is pretty relevant for us, I'd say. And at this point, I can show you some videos about end times. To do that, I'm going to have to stop sharing the slideshow here and bring up one of them. While I'm doing that, are there any questions or comments?
I can provide a small comment, which is like there's a basic way that we all do this, which is we look at reproduction rates of different groups in the society, or growth rates of different groups in the society, and we extend them into the future. And as a personal note, I grew up in Israel, and I immigrated to the United States about 15 years ago. And one of the reasons is that there was an obvious pattern. And the pattern is that the more religious groups in the societies around me were reproducing faster and growing faster than the secular groups. And if you extend that into the future, you're seeing mostly religious society. So that's like a basic way that we all do Cliodynamics. We just extend growth rates into the future. And for me, that was one of the reasons I wanted to leave Israel. Okay.
Yeah, population is an important driving force in all these societies, and how it gets distributed can affect outcomes in those societies. Is there anything else? If not, I'll show the first 12 minutes or so of this 22-minute video. It's a review of the book End Times by Peter Turchin. And this is from the YouTube channel, The New Enlightenment with Ashley. Ashley is a professor of economics. And this has a pretty good summary of some of the terms and concepts used in Cliodynamics. So that's why I'm going to show you the first part of this. She does a good job of explaining these concepts as an introduction to a critique of the book. The rest of this video is basically a critique of certain points in the book. But I wanted to get this first part out to explain better the terms and concepts of Cliodynamics. It's interesting, this last point about how we avoided disintegration after the Great Depression and the collapse of the economic system via the New Deal, kind of illustrates how and the fact that any system where the powerful can use the power to create more power, that's like having a you might say a steam engine that without a governor it spins faster and faster until it explodes. So the New Deal basically redistributed some of these inequities that had occurred leading up to the Great Depression, and in that way it avoided having another civil war or something like that in the United States. That actually improved it equalized these pressures, it equalized society, people's standing in society by redistributing some of the wealth, and that took the pressure off, and then society going through World War II and afterwards worked pretty well. So
It's complicated, though. You have a couple of hands up, Tom. Chris
Okay.
had his hand up first and then Jason.
Okay, Chris, go ahead.
Okay, this is probably a nonlinear chaotic feedback system. Would you agree?
Yeah, I guess so. I'm not an expert on it.
So if that graph that you saw with the sinusoidal curves was run again in their model with slightly different parameters, chaos theory would say you would get divergent results. Have they run that experiment? Have they put parameters into their model and generated this sinusoidal curve, and then put parameters in that were slightly different, and seen if they get, and observed if they get divergent effects? Is it sensitive to initial conditions or not? If it's not sensitive to initial conditions, then it probably doesn't capture the fundamental features of a chaotic system.
Yeah, well, it's true. The initial conditions that you start with, the initial assumptions are very important. There are various competing theories as to how these systems work, and that's one way to test the various. You test the various theories against each other and see which ones seem to be more correct as you project them out. So there's in complex systems, there's no simple answer. And that's why research is ongoing. They're gathering more data and refining these theories all the time. Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm afraid I've got something that you're not going to want to hear or like to hear, but I posted in chat a paragraph or two about these systems, and the based on the Peter Churchin's own published research, I'd say it's fair to say that the population grows to the limits of its resources and technology, and then it tries to sustain a population of elites, that baseline population, but then the elites overshoot the resources of the base population, causing a collapse and the cycle to begin anew. That being said, I'm no economist, but I do study history, and I have read some of the latest scholastic research about the Great Depression and the New Deal. Many contemporary scholars, as recently as the last few years, have come to the conclusion that much of what was done under the Great New Deal, it greatly extended the pain and suffering of the Great Depression. And this is borne out by the fact that much of the rest of the world, in fact, the rest of the world, even in Canada and places like Mexico, recovered from the Great Depression far faster in a shorter period of time. Many of the policies at the executive level that were enacted greatly extended the suffering. And this isn't my research. These are people far smarter than myself. But it seems to me that why the paradox here surrounding this is that if it's true that the elites tend to overburden the base population, one political party campaigns on decreasing the size of government, lessening burdensome regulation, and lowering taxes, while the other political party advocates the exact opposite. Now, it seems to me that if we are concerned about the elites here overburdening the baseline population, the lay people, that higher taxes, more regulation, and increasing the size of government would all lead to the outcome that we don't want when it comes to overpowering, when it comes to ultra powerful elites seizing ever more power and causing the system to collapse. Can you guess which side is which?
When you talk about taxes, it depends on how
No.
taxes
I
are
mean,
structured, obviously.
I mean, you could always point to microcosms of this or that exception to the rule. But as a general rule, more regulations, more taxes, an increasing the size of the government, those would all be negative factors when it comes to this cyclical collapsing cycle that Peter Churchin is talking about.
That can't be always, because there are market failures. So there are situations where the government is used. You can't do a blanket statement.
Yana, if you're not coming through very clearly, so there's something wrong with your sound. But raise your hand if you want to make a comment, and we'll call on you. Tom, go ahead. You're muted right now.
Part of the problem with this is that the projected sinusoidal curves are not. They're very smooth curves, but they are not sinusoidal. And so making predictions based on that becomes very tricky. The ups and downs of the economy and the ups and downs of the politicians and the ups and downs of the religions are complicated, complex, interactive. David, what were the 3 C's? And its prediction is hazardous. And when you have Category 4 hurricanes driving through a piece of the country, change is like that. We don't like it, but that's how it is. And there are similar things to Category 4 hurricanes that go through computer language design, medical designs, medical treatments that come along and they upset it, and then it settles down into a new normal, which has winners and losers, and most of us in the middle. Didn't it used to be, oh, but that looks good. And how do I choose? Can I choose? And the illusion that it's some nicely predictable sine wave is a trap, in my opinion.
I want to reiterate something that I said earlier when I displayed that particular graph, and that is that these oscillations that look like kind of like sine waves arise because of nonlinear feedbacks between different interacting components of the social system. So they're an artifact of various interactions among various factors in the society. And I was going to get into this later, but Cliodynamics was not meant to predict the future. That's not really
No.
what it does. It's to understand history. Yeah. Of course, the better we can understand history, the more accurate our projections into the future could be. But there's lots of factors that currently aren't accounted for. There are a lot of unknowable factors that could occur that there's probably no way to account for. I was going to get into this a little later, but one example is technology. The disruptive technologies occur, and they're kind of hard to anticipate. Another example from Asimov's Foundation series is the mule. A special kind of person who disrupted societies. So anyway, yeah, I understand that two things, that as was mentioned before, it's not necessarily cyclical. You can't explain history in terms of simple cycles like that.
Yeah.
And it's really not meant to be a way to predict the future, although it can be used to project things, the societies in the near future. It has no idea what society might look like 100 years from now. Okay,
Wayne
Carrie.
was next.
Carrie's next, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, is it Wayne?
Yeah, I think it's
Wayne.
Carrie.
Harry.
Whoever.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Okay. It seems like what they're trying to do is distill down all these myriad of interacting factors into a kind of understandable, simple narrative that we can use to evaluate why things happened in the past and what we're at risk from moving forward. The problem I see is, I mean, this is with anything that has to do with a statistical analysis, is trying to tease out causative factors from correlative factors, and also how you evaluate and quantify the parameters, like things like how do you measure political instability, right? And how do you compare current political instability with the political instability in France during the revolution or something like that? That seems problematic. And even numbers like things like trying to determine inflation, right? There are agreed upon numbers, but the method of measuring it over time has changed. It's politically influenced. Today certain things are excluded from the measure, like fuel costs and housing costs, which I would argue are two of the most important things that influence how much spare money I have at the end of the month. So there's these definitely some difficulties there. There's also this idea, I don't know, the inequality portion I have a bit of a problem with, because if my rich neighbor all of a sudden, has some financial calamity and ends up being middle class, that doesn't change my purchasing power. I mean, so unless we're just aggregating all of the folks at the upper end in terms of their influence on the majority of the population at the lower end, it seems to me that there's a bit of demonizing there. And there also is a benefit. I mean, a lot of rich people get rich for actually reasons that are productive. You may like Jeff Bezos or not, but a ton of people use Amazon because it's really convenient, right? Getting rid of Jeff Bezos does not create necessarily a net benefit for society. Again, more complicated. And again, not to go down that road, but when you have a debt-based money supply, there's no shortage of money. In fact, there's as much of it as people are willing to borrow into existence, which is its own kind of problem. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Yeah. As was pointed out, this is kind of a nascent science. It's only been around 20 years or so. So there's a lot of work to be done to improve defining what's being measured, understanding how to measure it, and that type of thing. So progress is being made, but I think some of your critiques, criticisms are true at this point. There's better definitions to be made and better ways to parse the data. There's more data to be collected. But I think we're on to something by using the scientific approach, using mathematical models that can be where you can add or change the variables and formalize it so that it's not just what it has been, guessing by looking at the social factors and just thinking that what applies over here also applies over there. That may not be true. Chris, go ahead.
Well, I think I'm next, Wayne.
Wayne.
Yes. Okay. Yes. I find it very interesting. As the previous speaker pointed out, it gives a little bit of narrative and such that it's most intriguing. One thing that hits me is the elite overproduction and hence competition for a fixed number of chairs, of musical chairs. And I was thinking the other night when I was reading about China, how so many of the younger generation have gone on not to just a college degree, but an advanced degree, only to find out there are no jobs for them. And they're just horrified. They're going, why did I study from age 4 to 24 all this when I thought I would get this golden ticket and now there's nothing? But sometimes when it's discussed, it's talked about how there's only a limited number of seats in Congress, governors and such. But the trouble is that's been true for decades, and we keep on producing more people. So I'm not altogether sure what would trigger it, because the pressure, it seems like it should continue forever. I think somewhere he talks about how, well, there was instability in the 70s and the 20s, but it's not quite the instability I would think is all that important. And then why does it go down? And I think he uses the argument, well, they had this kind of crisis, then they're kind of exhausted or frightened by what happens, so they pull away and kind of reconcile for a while until another generation comes about. But anyway, I don't know if anyone has any insight on that, but yeah, the overproduction of elites and competition for a fixed share of the pie is most interesting. Though in fairness, as the population gets bigger, there are more chairs to compete for. However, there's more people to compete, so it depends on how, if the chairs are growing faster or the people. Anyway, I'm rambling on that.
Yeah, the number of chairs is not necessarily static, but as the population grows, there's more people looking for those. But also, the imbalance in the power of these various categories changes. Even if the population grows, the number of elites may grow faster, because as you get a little power, it's easier to accrete more power. And that's been shown time and again that tends to happen. So I think looking just at overall population versus the number of you might say elite seats available is just a part of the picture. You have to look at other things too, and I think Cliodynamics attempts to do that. Okay, we have time for a couple more. I do have some more videos I'd like to show too, including a couple of interviews with Peter Turchin himself. So, Chris, go ahead.
Okay, if this theory is not necessarily to predict the future, if it is to explain history that has already happened, it suffers from the same exact problem that the chaotic system when you try to explain how something happens after the fact, you can arrive at the outcome that you want without really capturing all of the real contributions to it. For example, if you have a pool table and you shoot and break the 15 the 15 balls, and you see where they come out, you could come up with an explanation for every interaction with momentum, conservation of energy, and everything to get that outcome. But that may not really be, you'd have to get that with a degree of accuracy that is unattainable. And if you had a machine that put those cue balls in exactly the same place and hit the cue ball in exactly the same place, you would get a different distribution of cue balls on that table, which proves that the explanation of the cue balls, of the billiard balls on the table from their position, was not an actual explanation. It would only be an explanation if you could reproduce that and get the cue balls in exactly the same place. And that is so unlikely. So my main point is to explain what happened in the past is just as fraught with difficulty to predict what will happen.
Yes, it's very difficult. Yeah, chaos theory says basically what you've been saying. It's very, very difficult to project into the future some of these things. What they try to do in Cliodynamics is derive some of these relationships that they can understand, see the strongest correlations they can, and apply them to many different societies, hundreds of large-scale societies over the last 5,000 years, and test them. So far, as I mentioned, they've tested against about 30 some or more different ones to see correlation, test certain correlations, and some survive, some don't. And as we get more and more data and more able to test these things more and more thoroughly, we can see that some might turn out to be generalizable, and actually there's always going to be factors that may change things that we don't understand. But
I'm conflicted.
As we find the theory more and more, we can come closer and closer to modeling reality.
Yeah, I'm conflicted on the subject. I agree. I'm on the one hand, I think that chaotic system is going to be totally unpredictable, and on the other hand, I think there are indeed patterns in history, and I don't know how to reconcile those two views, both of which seem to have merit. I don't know how to reconcile that.
Yeah, it's likely that things look chaotic because we can't take account of all the possible things that would affect the system. Like on a table, if there's a part of the bumper that's a little deader than another part, or if there's an irregularity in the surface of the table, or if the cue ball is struck with a little more left English or backspin, or if it's struck harder, all that affects the outcome. And it's hard to take account of every variable, and it's hard to know which ones are the most important in the outcome. But that's why we keep looking at more data and developing these things and testing them to see against as many tests as we can to see what's correct and what seems to be true. Okay, one more. Let's try to make it quick because my next couple videos will probably take the next half hour. So go ahead, Jason.
I seem to recall Torin giving a series of lectures on cyclical cycles based on Peter Churchin's work. I don't remember him specifically referring to the science as Cliodynamics. I could be mistaken. It's been a while. But I seem to recall that he was using this body of work as a differential tool to predict the future, as we've had we've discussed other methodologies of predicting the future. It stands to reason logically, though, that if predicting the future is an impossible task, not just because of black swan events and novel technologies and what have you, that all methods of predicting the future or futurist techniques can be in some way falsified, because if it is indeed impossible to predict the future, then no technique is going to be adequate to do so. More to the point, I don't know if you recall the discussion that led to today's presentation, but you had brought up Cliodynamics in the context of using it as a tool specifically for predicting the degree to which elites have an impact on the lay population that underneath their rule. Because I had brought up the argument that I thought that the group was over attributing the impact of the political elite things that were manifesting within society in general. And then you said Cliodynamics is a science to predict that. I would like to see some discussion, as promised, as to how Cliodynamics can measure or quantify how much impact the current body of politics or federal politics do have that impact on things that we may or may not over attribute to them. I could go on, but we're out of time.
Yeah. As I mentioned before, Cliodynamics was not created to predict the future. It was created to understand history. As the understanding grows, the temptation to predict the future will grow also. And but it may become more accurate as it gets more refined. But in the pool, the billiards example, you can't totally predict everything accurately because you don't know everything. So this can get more refined and better in understanding history, but it's not meant to be a predictive tool. It can be used to understand what's happening and maybe understand what the best methods are to improve the situation. But predicting with any high degree of accuracy is very difficult, especially in complex systems like this.
So predicting, what about quantifying, as you mentioned previously, quantifying the effect to which the elites have influence over our lives or don't?
I'm not sure what you're asking. Okay, I'd like to go on a little bit here. Okay, the next video is an interview with Andrew Yang. It's probably 45 minutes long. I'd like to show the first 15 minutes or so of this. Plus, the next video is a little excerpt from that interview. So, and then I have a couple others that we're probably not going to get to. An interesting one that I just want to mention is this interview with Neil Ferguson of the Hoover Institute, which is a conservative think tank about the end times based on that book. And I'll just show the link to that and another one, which is a little longer interview on this page, if you want to view those on your own. I don't think we'll be able to get those today. But I do want to get to this next one, which is we're going to show part of the interview with Andrew Yang and Peter Turchin, and it's actually, the title is Can Math Predict the End Times? So I'll show you that here if I can bring it up. Got to stop sharing first. I had too many windows open, so here we go.
I have one final comment, and that is that predicting the future could very well have an effect on the future. It could, making a prediction about the future could either change the future itself, or it could lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I would certainly say, like, if the prediction was there's going to be nuclear war in the next 6 months, that would impact everything. People would change their lifestyle, people will do all this. So the risk of making a prediction of a future is that might itself affect the future. That's my so anyway.
Yeah, that's true. If anyone listened to the prediction and heeded it, you have the Cassandra theory. Yes, that was one of the main ideas in the Asimov's foundation theory too. This foundation had to be kept secret so that no one was aware of what they were doing and so forth. Yeah, when you make predictions, if people listen to them, it can have an effect. Maybe positive, maybe negative. I want to show at least one more video here. This is there was over half an hour left of that, the last video I showed, so I didn't show you the whole interview. But there's another one that I would like to show, and let's see. Here's one about the next 10 or 20 years in the U.S., because that's most relevant to us. And this is another part of that interview with Andrew Yang. Let me see if I can get it up here. If we don't have any more comments, I would like to show a little bit, at least, of the next video, which is the interview with the guy from the Hoover Institution. Okay, Jason, what do you have?
In retrospect, this brilliant theory by Turchin, although maybe not a great tool to use to future. In retrospect, if we use it as a tool to examine history in the past tense, it perfectly explains why liberalism has been the downfall of communist societies throughout history. It perfectly illustrates the problem with communist elites and why communism is such a damning system, why it always leads to massive die-offs of the population and the most extreme amounts of suffering we've seen in our species history. You could see it in the basic cycles of the elites and the wealth inequality that it leads to, and the how these of wealth transfer cause systems to collapse naturally.
Okay. We do
Oh.
have limited time, so I do want to respond to what you just said. It applies to not only communist systems but all others. It helps explain the French Revolution, for example, during the monarchical times, and the Russian Revolution, which led to the communist takeover of the Bolsheviks. And it explains
Would you describe
it explains the American Civil War, which was not based on a communist system, obviously. So it has a broader application than you're implying, and it's not just communist systems that have these problems. All systems can have these problems. Eric, do you have something quickly? Oh, you're muted, Eric.
Which Eric?
Eric Hand, sorry.
Okay.
There. Yeah, I just want to recommend the book to emphasize again how incredibly difficult and failed prediction of society has been in the past. It's called The Experts Speak, second edition, and it goes in several different categories: economics, war, politics, and others, entertainment, by predictions by the people at the time who were considered top experts in their field, and how incredibly wrong they were. It's just it just makes you realize how incredibly difficult predictions, especially about the future, are.
Yeah. It's interesting that in one of these recent videos that we saw, Peter Turchin talked about retrodiction, and that's how he was testing his theories. He was taking data from from a society and projecting it forward into from one point to another, but this is a point in the past, so we can test the results. So and he mentioned in another one that just 10-20 years ago, a lot of people were saying everything's improving, whereas he saw in his theory that things could get worse. You can compare different theories and see which one comes out with better results over time. And nothing's perfect, but I think this mathematical approach is a better way to look at things.
Well, sometimes there's always many factors affecting what's going to happen, but sometimes just a few are so overwhelmingly relatively important that they can be put into a mathematical model, and you can get at least usefully accurate, somewhat enough to be useful predictions. Other times you can't, or the new factors are coming up that people don't appreciate. Well, AI is a big thing to screw up everybody, because the top people realize now that whoever gets the first to superhuman intelligence, it's sort of a winner takes all or almost all, and all the biggest corporations and governments are pouring everything into it, billions and billions, because they know whoever gets there first, like sort of wins all or almost everything, or destroys humanity. I sent out a video to many of you that about that, and top people have no clear guarantees at all that this won't happen. In fact, it seems likely it will eventually. It will be replaced.
Things that appear to be obvious and correct may not turn out to be when they're tested under somewhat different circumstances, like Newton's laws of gravity. They work great on Earth, but if you're trying to predict the precession of the orbit of Mercury, they don't give the correct results. You needed general relativity to do that, which is a refinement of Newton's laws of physics.
And the problem is that
as you get better and better with these mathematical models, the result and test them against what actually occurs, then the models themselves can get better.
Yeah. And the problem is that the top experts developing these systems do not fully understand the AI they're developing. In other words, for a given set of inputs, they really can't predict what it's going to produce for output. So you could, in the old type of programming that I did, you could go through by hand and sort of predict what your output would be a little slower. They can't now. It's just beyond human, and therefore, just recently it's advanced even in science and math, which is pretty weak, to near PhD levels in some areas of science and math now, just very recently, and that's very scary.
Yeah, when you get into complex systems, you have to apply the techniques of complexity science. So, but I want to move on a little bit. We have a couple more hands. Carrie, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it seems like a lot of this has to do with how we identify the parameters, and it's real easy to, criticize, but I think there's, look, there's population dynamics, right? And you can reduce that to a mathematical model, right? And there are pressures. Everyone feels that. So I think that the question is, how do we compare and evaluate different approaches and try to identify things? Turchin's identified his, but by all means, let's use the same method, because there are competing theories out there, or hypotheses, in terms of what are the most critical and important elements. And, if we, through back testing or however you want to do it, unfortunately, unlike weather, there's not a huge repository of data. So, it's kind of limited what we can do, but, we can certainly see what affects things more than others. Some other competing theories, a guy named Richard Duncan came up with this thing called Olduvai theory, which is kind of an extension of Hubbert's peak oil thing, where he looks at energy availability per capita, and it looks like that peaked sometime in the mid 70s or something like that. That could be an absolute influence in the way complex societies develop over time. Joseph Tainer wrote a whole book, a pretty scholarly book, about the collapse of complex societies. And he kind of attributed everything to decreasing marginal returns as things become overly specialized and bureaucratic, dead weight takes hold, things like that. Anyway, thanks.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Yeah, if you start off with simple ideas, you can get good results up to a point. But with a mathematical approach that Turchin is taking, these formulas can be refined, more variables can be added, and so forth. So it's an ongoing effort, and they're trying to make it more accurate all the time.
Well, and there's the point of what's good enough for our purposes.
Right. Problem is, with these complex systems, if you're not good enough, you could get very divergent results, and any conclusions may be pretty suspect. I want to move on, but I want to have let Bob Kaufman make another comment before I get to my conclusion here. So go ahead, Bob.
Thanks. When it comes to simple ideas, I'll take a backseat to no one. So I would like to run a simple idea by you guys. I have heard that there's something called a chimpanzee that we're related to, and that in those small groups of chimpanzees,
there tends to be an A chimpanzee that is the power male of all the chimpanzees, and that if that chimpanzee becomes too autocratic, other chimpanzees will gang up, kill them, and they will change the leadership of the group. I'd like to posit that we are chimpanzees with a little better brain capacity, but we are primarily chimpanzees. And one of the ways that we've been able to do better is through technology, and that the more advanced technology gets, the more the alpha chimpanzees, which we're calling elites, will be able to control the entire society, economy, world, country, or whatever particular subgroup or total group that they are responsible for. And but eventually there's less and less elites and more split between those who have and have not. And the stronger technology becomes, the more they will use it as a source of control and subjugation. And we are about ready to unleash a technology that we have never had before and that we don't understand, called artificial intelligence. And it scares me that it may become 1,000 times more intelligent than Einstein is, if I really understand what that means. But what really scares me, beyond the artificial intelligence itself putting the kibosh on our species, is what those alphas, those elites, will be able to do with that technology if they grasp it and can manipulate it in ways that we betas sitting down here in our homes and apartments can't possibly keep up with or do anything about. So this may be a future that's ahead of us. I can see it logical that it is, but what I like about any theory, Mearsheimer says a really great theory, which this is probably not since I'm thinking of it, but a really great theory is only right for 75% of the time, and 25% it's not right. And since I'm not as good as Mearsheimer, let's hope that whatever I'm thinking of has a very low possibility of being correct, but damned if it doesn't make sense to me. So I just thought I'd bring it to your attention.
Yeah, regarding AI, people are trying to address it, but what they're addressing is the human use of AI and trying to like eliminate, reduce the use of deep fakes and all that kind of stuff that AI makes easy to do. What is not being addressed is the AI itself becoming autonomous, setting its own goals, reprogramming itself to improve itself. And at that point, it's totally out of our control. And that hasn't really been addressed. So that's a totally different topic. I don't want to get into it, but
no, but let's just posit in our brains how comfortable we are with a technology that is totally out of our control. Do we feel comfortable?
People
I don't
love
feel comfortable.
large language models and what they can do to help.
And what does that mean to someone like Turchin's theory? Okay. Just interesting.
It's kind of wild card.
It's interesting to ponder in our small brain pans. So.
Yeah. Some of the predictions are that by the end of this decade, AI will be as smart as a person. By 2050, it'll be millions of times or maybe more, many orders of magnitude smarter than all of humanity. And at that point, it'll be doing whatever it wants.
Do you think you understand what that means, Tom? Because I don't.
I don't really understand what that means. But I don't want to get into that.
Okay.
I do a presentation on that a number of months
ago.
Bye-bye. But it's an interesting idea. Yes. Okay, I want to finish up here with one or two. Let's see where to go. There. Okay, can you see this?
Yes, I can.
I see heads nodding. Okay. Here's a disclaimer I put in. Okay, Cliodynamics is successful at uncovering some historical relationships among various factors in large-scale societies, and it's getting better. And it can create mathematical models that can be tested by applying them to past and current societies to see if these models work. This can have some application to predicting the future course of society, but it is limited. These models may work until a new variable is introduced into the society, for example. There's currently no way to predict what novel disruptive events, such as a new technology that affects the physical or social status of the society's members, could occur. And not only that, there could be new factors introduced, but we obviously are not incorporating all possible factors into the theory. We're trying to determine which ones have the most effect at this point. There may be ways to modify the equations appropriately so that when such events do occur, we can learn to understand the possible effects. That brings to mind the cosmological constant that Einstein put into his theory of general relativity. He thought at one point it would be a good idea to do that to account for static universe. Universe turned out not to be static, so he thought he had made a mistake, but then people discovered dark energy and dark matter, and that factor of H that's in the equation can be used to account for that. So there's lots of things that we can do to improve these equations, and people are working on that. As we learn more about our world, the incidence of black swan events, which was mentioned earlier, may decrease because we can foresee things a little better as we know more about what's going on around us. So what seems like a black swan event at one point in our knowledge base may be something that we could anticipate when we know more. So we don't understand the collapse of historical empires. We're trying to do that, and that's why we have Cliodynamics was created. We need a systematic application of scientific method to history, and so there's no real consensus right now on what general mechanisms explain the collapse of historical empires. For example, there are over 200 explanations for the collapse of the Holy Roman Empire, or of the Roman Empire. And for example, one is, they lined their aqueducts with lead, so everyone became stupid. What is needed is a systematic application of the scientific method to history, and verbal theories should be translated into mathematical models. And then from those models, we can make precise predictions or retrodictions, and then rigorously test them with the empirical data. In short, history needs to become an analytical predictive science, kind of like economics, which is not complete and is often inaccurate, but is getting better. We have to do the same thing with history. So modeling historical processes with differential equations or agent-based simulations, using statistical approaches to data analysis, these are a key ingredient in the research program of Cliodynamics. But ultimately, the aim of Cliodynamics is to discover general principles that explain the functioning and dynamics of actual historical societies. And as we discussed using those to make predictions about the future is subject to error at best. But it can help us anticipate the future a little better and perhaps make changes that will help ensure that we have a future. So my final thing here, parting shot. George Santayana wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." Everyone's probably heard that. I would say those who cannot understand their history are condemned to repeat it. It's understanding versus just remembering. So that's about it. I see a few hands up again. So let's take a few more questions and then we'll close this out. Bob, did you make your comment or do you still have your hand up for another question? Bob Kaufman. Oh, okay. David.
I just wanted to mention that tomorrow is Brian Torrens Memorial Celebration of Life. And if anyone would like information on that, send me a message through Meetup or send it to my email and I'll send you the information I have.
Yeah, Brian was, I think he was one of the founding members of this group 40 years ago or so. And he was kind of a force behind this.
Well, more like 50, I think, but yes.
Yeah. Okay, last hand. We'll give Jason the last word, I guess. Go ahead.
I just wanted to do Bob Kaufman a favor to rest a great concern he has and finally answer his question. The answer to the problem you seek, which is how to prevent those in power, the great alphas of our society, from taking too much wealth or power, becoming tyrants, is found in the wisdom of our forefathers, which is we the people must have the means and the willingness to act upon tyrants who would rule over us with deadly and lethal force if necessary, and be willing to put that government to death, which is why it is the second civil liberty, because it is one of the most important. And any talk about curbing our ability to have a check and balance, the balance of power, so to speak, is an infringement upon that ability, that almighty, all-important ability to do so. And if you read in the Federalist Papers, they state explicitly, time and again, and rented and printed word, that was not hunting, not fishing. That was the true reason for firearms ownership. And
okay, how do you determine who is a tyrant? One person's tyrant's another's constitutionalist.
Can I just tell
I'm not
Jason?
sure what that has to do with Cliodynamics.
Several different ways.
Jason, thank you so much, because my mind now is totally calm. I'm sure that if every adult in the United States of America had bazooka guns and automatic rifles, that they would totally be able to control the power of the elites, no matter how strong they get or matter how good technology becomes. You are absolutely right. I love it that you understand things so definitively that you can make such absolutist statements. Thank God for you, Jason. Keep going, boy.
Okay, H-Tom. The last remark.
Next week, me talking about living longer. How to live to be 150, maybe. If you do that, do you become immortal? Will we know so much about medicine at that point that we can all become Lazarus Long? Or maybe, who remember 3000 wanted to kill himself and even tried to a couple of times. Or a more modest goal, how to maximize your effective life while you're still walking around here. Freebie. Walking around is a good thing to do. You should try and do 5 to 10 miles a day.
Okay, sounds interesting.
Adding to that, I have to say thank you for your prayers over the last 4 months. My vision is now better than it was in my 20s.
Wow.
It might end up being better than it was when the Marine Corps tried to make me a sniper.
Wow, it's great. Great, great.
It has been a hellish 3 months, and I'm still exhausted, and my doctors tell me that this is normal, although the surgery is very small. It really bothers the body. So,
well, I'm glad you're seeing better and feeling better. H. Tom.
It is bizarre to look across over there and see there's a book out of order.
Yeah.
30 feet away.
You can see individual leaves on trees.
Yeah. It's just, it's wonderful and bizarre, and
you've got more data to process. That's why you're so tired. You've got more visual data to process.
Maybe.
That's entirely possible.
Yes, you got more details, more decisions to make.
Yeah, regarding your talk next week, I think Elon Musk has expressed the hope that at some point we'll be extending human life by at least 1 year every year. So at that point, we can kind of almost become immortal. And he's hoping that'll occur during his lifetime. But so I don't know if you're going to address that, but that's an interesting thought.
I'm 76 now. He better get the hell the use on this.
Yeah, it's a little late for some of us, I think.
Yeah, well, if you can, I have an uncle who's just become 100. He fought in World War II.
Might I recommend cryonics?
What?
Recommend what?
Level?
Recommend what, Jason?
Might I recommend cryonics, medical time travel?
I'd rather be walking around.
Yeah, I'd feel frozen in time. I couldn't do it.
Okay, thanks a lot, everybody.
Bye-bye.
This was interesting.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
Good, very good topic, and then very interesting. I'm going to take more research.
Yes, thank you, Tom.
Welcome. See you next week.
Thank you.
Discussion, see you next.
David, can you tell me where the memorial is going to be?
Yeah, it's in I'm sorry.
Prior Lake.
Prior Lake, but I'll send you the address.